You gave away your first-class seat to a stranger? Are you out of your mind? That's what people told Sarah Miller, but she didn't care. What she saw wasn't just a man in uniform with a limp and a scarred face. She saw someone the world had tried to forget, and without a second thought, she gave up one of the few luxuries she might never get again. She thought it was nothing, a small, quiet choice. She didn't know that months later, a line of army vehicles would pull up outside her home. She didn't know that strangers in uniform would rebuild everything she'd been barely holding together. She didn't know the man she helped had once saved dozens. This is how a single choice planted something deep, kindness that grew and came back in ways no one saw coming. Welcome to Grateful Stories. Stick around. You might never see a simple act the same way again. Sarah Miller stood at the edge of her family's worn-out farm in rural Georgia. The morning fog curled around the old wooden posts like ghostly fingers. Out beyond the fields, a quiet two-lane road stretched endlessly, like a silver thread unraveling into faraway places she'd only ever daydreamed about. She leaned on the creaky gate, holding a warm mug of coffee. She was 29 and had never once left the counties around her. Her world was here, a patchy farm passed down from her late parents and a small booth at the Saturday market where she sold veggies and jam made by hand. It wasn't a bad life. There was something meaningful about pulling crops from stubborn soil and recognizing every pothole and sunrise like old friends. Still, on some nights when the sky exploded with stars, Sarah would lie in bed and ache for more. She dreamt of cities that never slept, oceans that never ended, mountains so tall they made you forget your worries. But that was fantasy. Reality was patching the roof herself, borrowing parts for the tractor, and stretching every dollar for groceries after. Feed and seed were paid, trips, hotels, airports. They belonged to someone else's world until the letter came. It arrived in a thick cream envelope with her name written in familiar handwriting. Sarah's fingers, rough from farm work, opened it carefully. Inside was a wedding. Invite from Amanda Clark, her old college roommate, one of the few who still kept in touch after Sarah came back to run the farm. Amanda was getting married, in Seattle. And inside the envelope was something even more shocking, a printed airline ticket, already booked with Amanda's frequent flyer miles. "I'm not taking no for an answer," she had scribbled at the bottom. "You're going. You deserve this." Sarah sat with the ticket in her lap for a long time. Who would care for the animals? Could she even afford a nice outfit? Did she even know how to navigate an airport? Still, beneath the nerves, something stirred. Maybe it was time. 2 weeks later, Sarah found herself at a small regional airport, gripping her boarding pass like a lifeline. She wore her best pair of jeans, a clean flannel, and the same old leather boots she'd shined until they nearly glowed. Everything around her felt strange. Loudspeakers crackled, people rushed. Signs blinked with codes and times she didn't understand. She found her gate, sat down near a window, and watched planes move like giant birds. She smiled nervously, feeling totally out of place but weirdly excited. "Excuse me, miss, is this seat taken?" She turned. An older man stood next to her, leaning heavily on a cane. His legs seemed stiff, barely bending as he sat down with a soft grunt. His hands, gripping the cane, were covered in faded burn scars. A worn-out army cap sat low over his eyes, embroidered with a unit she didn't recognize. "Not at all," Sarah said, moving her bag. He nodded in thanks but didn't speak further. Around them, people shifted slightly away. A few sneaked glances at his scars. Others didn't look at him at all. Sarah knew that silence. She had lived it in the last years of her father's life, when illness made him small and weak and people didn't know what to say. She offered a gentle smile. After a pause, he gave one back, a subtle tug of his mouth beneath his cap. Then the loudspeaker crackled. "Flight 23 to Seattle now boarding." Sarah got up, smoothing her jeans. Her ticket said Group 3, but then someone from the airline flagged her down. "Miss Miller, you've been selected for a free upgrade today, first class." Sarah blinked. "Are you sure?" The woman grinned. positive in joy. She stepped into the line for first class, feeling strange eyes on her. It felt like she was stepping into someone else's life. Then she looked back. The man with the cane was struggling to lift his worn duffel bag. He was heading toward the back, coach, probably a tight middle seat. 14 hours in that condition. She hesitated. Then she turned. "Sir," she said, weaving back through the line. Would you like to switch seats with me?" He looked up, stunned. I couldn't." "Please," Sarah said, offering her ticket. "You deserve a little comfort." For a moment he didn't move, then with a trembling hand he accepted it. "Thank you," he said, voice rough, maybe from more than just age. Sarah smiled. "Have a good flight, sir." She took his seat in the back, feeling oddly lighter. She had no idea. Everything was about to change. Sarah slid into her narrow coach seat, tucking her canvas tote beneath the seat in front of her. The air around her buzzed with engine hum. The faint smell of oil, recycled air, and the chatter of strangers crammed too close together. She shifted. In her seat, already second-guessing the decision to give up first class. But then she glanced toward the front of the plane. Past the rows of worn fabric and restless passengers, she spotted the veteran settling into a wide, cushioned chair. A flight attendant leaned down, speaking to him with a soft, genuine smile that, unlike the others, didn't carry pity. Jim Carter, if that was his name, looked unsure. He clutched the armrests like he didn't believe he belonged there. His scarred hands tightened, his shoulders stiff. But there was something else now, too. Something Sarah could see even from a distance. Gratitude. Maybe even peace. She leaned back into her own seat, letting herself smile faintly. Maybe not all kind acts went unseen after all. The flight was long. 14 hours of stiff legs, crying babies, bad coffee, and lukewarm food. The man beside her snored with his mouth open. A kid nearby kept dropping a tablet with a crash that made her flinch every time. Still, Sarah felt light. Not happy exactly, but like her chest had a little more space in it. She kept thinking of the man up front, what he must have carried. With him, not just the physical injuries, but the weight of stories no one asked about, and how something so small, offering a better seat, had brought even a brief moment of ease into that burdened life. Halfway through the flight, Sarah got up to stretch. As she moved past the curtain separating first class, she glanced in. He was awake, not sleeping like most of the others, just quietly watching clouds drift past the window. His posture had changed. He sat easier, not as tense, shoulders a bit, more relaxed. Their eyes met for a second. He gave her a nod. Not just a thank you, something deeper. A silent connection, mutual respect. Sarah nodded back, then kept walking. When the plane landed in Seattle, the airport was a blur of noise and movement. Everyone pushing toward baggage claim, half asleep and rushing to their next thing. In that crowded chaos, she never saw the veteran again. He disappeared into the crowd. Later, she thought she should have asked his name, maybe talked more. But then again, maybe some moments were perfect because they ended before they got complicated. Amanda's wedding was beautiful. Nestled in a quiet vineyard outside the city, it was warm, honest, and filled with love. Sarah danced, laughed, and sipped wine with strangers who welcomed her like an old friend. For once, she let herself be present. She breathed in the scent of flowers, felt the breeze lift her hair, and smiled at a world beyond her farm. When it was time to fly back, she was back in coach. Her boots pinched. Her back ached, but she didn't mind. The trip had been worth every second. Back home, life returned to its usual rhythm. Morning feedings, Saturday markets, the endless list of broken things to fix. The flight, the veteran, the seat she gave up, they became part of her memory, one more thread in the quiet quilt of her life, and she never expected anything more from it. She already had her reward, the feeling that doing good, quietly, without fanfare, was enough. So, when Sarah was woken one windy Saturday by the sound of engines outside, she thought nothing of it. Probably the neighbors' teenage boys goofing around with their trucks again. Grumbling playfully to herself, she threw on a jacket and headed for the porch. But what she saw made her freeze. It wasn't pickup trucks. It was a military convoy. 3. Army green Humvees rolled to a stop at the edge of her driveway. Soldiers in neat uniforms climbed out. A black SUV with tinted windows idled behind them, dust curling in the air, and stepping down from the first vehicle was a man she thought she'd never see again, Jim Carter. Only now, he wasn't just the scarred man in the battered cap. He was standing tall in a crisp formal uniform, polished boots shining, military medals pinned proudly to his chest. The limp was still there, but less pronounced. His presence was different, strong, sure. He smiled at her, a warm, slow smile that lit up his face. Sarah's heart hammered. She stepped off the porch, nearly stumbling as confusion, shock, and something else, hope, rushed through her. I don't understand, she said softly. Jim stepped forward, close enough for her to see the fine details of his uniform. His voice was calm, steady, and kind. It's good to see you again, Miss Miller. She couldn't find any words. Her eyes swept across the scene. The soldiers, the Humvees, the black SUV, all lined up like some surreal honor guard. Jim chuckled gently. You look as surprised as I was. He nodded toward the SUV, where a man in a suit approached with the quiet efficiency of someone used to being obeyed. He handed Sarah a thick envelope, nodded respectfully, and stepped away. Her name was written on the front in clean, careful script. She opened it slowly. Inside was a certificate, official, crisp and stamped with a gold Army crest, a formal recognition of extraordinary kindness and humanity. Presented to Miss Sarah Miller by Colonel James Carter, United States Army. Sarah blinked. Colonel? He wasn't just any veteran, he was Colonel Jim Carter, a decorated member of one of the Army's elite forces. She looked up, stunned. Jim smiled, a little shy now. You didn't know who I was, he said, and that's exactly why it meant so much. Behind Jim, a few soldiers started unloading large crates from one of the Humvees. Sarah could hear the clatter of metal, the thud of wood hitting the ground. Others gathered what looked like construction supplies, long planks, rolls of fencing, wire, buckets of nails, and heavy tools. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. What are they doing? Jim's smile turned playful. We brought you something, he said. A few things, actually. Sarah watched, stunned, as two soldiers carried a massive wooden crate toward her porch. Another group started setting up sawhorses and measuring lengths of timber. It looked like construction. What is this? She asked again, firmer this time. Jim faced her, his expression growing more serious, almost ceremonial. You gave me something priceless, he said. You gave up your seat, comfort, ease, for no reason other than kindness. You didn't know me, and you still did it. Sarah shook her head quickly. It was just a seat. It wasn't to me, Jim said gently, but with weight in his voice. Not that day. He stepped closer, his voice lowering so that only she could hear. I was flying home from a treatment center in Seattle. I've had more surgeries than I can count. Burn recovery, skin grafts, physical therapy. For months, I felt like nothing more than a set of scars. I forgot what it felt like to be seen, to be human. He paused, letting the silence settle between them. But on that plane, for the first time in months, someone saw me. Not the burns, not the uniform, just me. Sarah swallowed hard. She didn't know what to say. Jim's tone brightened slightly as he stepped back and motioned to the crates. So we thought it was only fair to return the favor. We're going to rebuild your barn. The words hit her like a gust of wind. She blinked. What? Jim nodded. One of the guys in my unit owns a construction company now. When I told the team what you did, they didn't even hesitate. They volunteered, took time off, flew in on their own dime. They wanted to help, not just for me, for you. Sarah turned slowly to look at the barn, the one her father once proudly maintained. A storm had torn through it last spring. She'd tried to patch it herself, board by board, but she didn't have the time or money to fix it properly. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice shaking. Jim's face softened. "We want to." The next hours passed in a blur. The soldiers moved like a well-oiled machine, joking and working with the easy rhythm of people who trusted each other with their lives. They measured, sawed, hammered, and rebuilt. Some reinforced the livestock pens. Others mended broken beams and hauled out debris. The farm hadn't felt this alive in years. At one point, Sarah brought out pitchers of lemonade and found herself standing beside Jim watching the team. "You really didn't have to go this far," she said quietly. Jim glanced at her, a glint of humor in his eyes. "You really didn't have to give up that seat." Sarah smiled, her throat tightening. "Fair enough." They stood in silence for a while. Two people whose lives had crossed by pure chance, changed by a decision made in less than a minute. As the sun started to sink, painting the fields gold, Jim turned to her again. "There's one more thing," he said, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out a small coin, old and slightly worn, and pressed it into her hand. "It's called a challenge coin," he explained. "Soldiers give them to each other to honor acts of loyalty or courage. Usually it stays within the military." Sarah turned it over. On one side was the emblem of Jim's unit. On the other were 4 words: "Deeds, not words." "It's not something we give lightly," Jim said. "And almost never to civilians." Sarah blinked hard against the tears rising in her eyes. I don't know what to say." Jim smiled softly. "You already said it, when you saw me." In that moment, Sarah understood something she hadn't before. Kindness wasn't a small thing, it was everything. It built bridges with no tolls. It planted seeds, even in hearts that had forgotten how to grow. And sometimes, just sometimes, it brought a convoy of soldiers to your front door. By late afternoon, the barn stood tall and proud. Fresh red paint gleamed in the sunlight. It looked like it belonged in a calendar, not like the broken-down relic she had once nearly given up on. In one day, everything had shifted. Not just the barn, not just the farm, something inside her. As the soldiers packed their gear and loaded the empty crates back into the trucks, Jim approached her one last time. "We'll be heading out soon," he said. His voice held something she couldn't quite name. Regret, maybe, or something softer. She nodded, afraid her voice would crack if she spoke. The thought of them leaving made her heart ache more than she expected. Jim must have sensed it. Jim looked at her for a long moment, then reached into his uniform jacket again. "There's one more thing," he said, handing her a plain manila folder. Sarah raised an eyebrow as she took it. Inside was a neatly typed letter on official veterans, affairs letterhead, and a check. Her breath caught. The amount was more than she had ever seen on a single slip of paper. "Jim, what is this?" she whispered, stunned. He rubbed the back of his neck, a little sheepish. "The guys pitched in," he said. "Some of it came from the Veteran Support Fund, some from us personally. We just wanted to make sure your farm stays yours. For good." Sarah felt her knees weaken. She clutched the folder to her chest, trying to breathe. The money wasn't just generous, it was life-changing. It would pay off the taxes she'd been quietly dreading for months, enough to repair the old farmhouse, maybe even bring in help for the next harvest. This wasn't charity. It wasn't pity. It was gratitude, pure and honest. She looked at Jim, overwhelmed. "I don't even know what to say." He gave her that soft smile again, the same one he'd worn when she first gave up her seat. "Then don't say anything," he replied. "Just promise me one thing." Sarah nodded, barely holding back tears. "Keep growing things." She laughed, brushing her sleeve across her eyes. "That, Colonel Carter, I can promise." The convoy pulled away just before sunset. The engines rumbled low, fading into the hush of the countryside. Sarah stood by the end of her dirt driveway, the check still in her hand, waving as the last Humvee disappeared beyond the trees. She stayed there for a while after the dust settled, breathing in the cool air. She didn't fully understand what had just happened. Her hands still trembled a little, but something inside her had shifted. Her world felt bigger, brighter. The next morning, Sarah woke with the sunrise. Same routine, feeding the chickens, watering the garden, hauling buckets out to the horses. But everything felt different now, like something heavy had been lifted. That afternoon, when she walked into town with fresh produce for the market, she noticed the change before anyone said a word. People stopped in the street. They smiled, nodded, whispered. She saw eyes following her, soft, curious, warm. They'd seen the convoy. They'd heard pieces of the story. Landry, the grumpy hardware store owner, tipped his cap to her gently. Mrs. Greaves, the no-nonsense librarian, pressed a basket of warm muffins into her hands without saying a word. Even old Mr. Holloway, who hadn't spoken to anyone in over 10 years, gave her a quiet, good girl as she passed. Sarah didn't explain what had happened, not fully. Not because she was hiding anything, but because some miracles are better. Kept close, tucked into the quiet places of the heart. A week later, another letter arrived. Handwritten, plain paper. No official stamps this time. The handwriting was blocky, a little uneven. It was from Jim. Dear Sarah, I've been thinking a lot about that flight. About how sometimes one small act of kindness can do more than a medal or a mission. When I got hurt, I thought I lost everything. My sense of purpose, my place in the world, my faith in people. You gave it back without even knowing it. You didn't just give up a seat. You gave a soldier a reason to keep believing. And sometimes that's the kind of rescue that matters most. Stay stubborn. Stay kind. Keep growing things. If you're ever near Fort Bragg, there's a place at my table. Always, Jim Carter. Sarah folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the wooden box by her bed, the one where she kept the things too special to lose. That night, she lay under her covers, with the windows open. The cool Georgia breeze drifted in. She looked up at the stars and smiled. Somewhere out there, a man she barely knew, but somehow knew deeply, was carrying her kindness forward. And she would keep planting, in her fields, in the hearts of strangers, in quiet faith that one act of compassion could still, even now, change the world. The seasons turned as they always do. Summer softened into fall. The fields blushed gold beneath the sun. Pumpkins swelled heavy on the vines. Apples reddened on the trees her father once planted. The air grew crisp. The scent of earth and wood smoke returned. And Sarah's farm, it didn't just survive, it flourished. The new barn stood proudly in the center of the land, its fresh red paint glowing against the backdrop of green fields. Its doors were wide open, revealing neatly stacked hay, gleaming tools, and healthy animals in sturdy pens. For the first time in years, the roof didn't leak. The fences stood firm. The soil looked cared for, orderly, tended, alive. Sarah stood at the edge of the porch, arms crossed, watching it all. What used to feel like a losing battle now looked like something out of a postcard. The work wasn't easier, but her heart was lighter. The farm had always been a quiet, stubborn place, but now it felt like it had a future. And something else had changed, too. The people around her changed with it. Neighbors who once only gave her small, polite nods now stopped to chat. They waved from their trucks. A few even pulled into the driveway to drop off spare fencing or old equipment. Some came just to say hello. It was subtle, but unmistakable. A shift in how they saw her. Sarah wasn't just the girl who lived alone. On her parents' old farm anymore, she'd become something else, a reminder. That kindness, real, simple kindness, mattered. That doing good without asking for anything back still had a place in the world. That small choices could echo farther than anyone guessed. She started small. At her booth in the Saturday farmers market, she set out a small wooden box with a handwritten sign beside her eggs and jars of jam. Take what you need, pay what you can. At first she worried that people might take advantage, that she'd lose more than she could afford to give. But something surprising happened. People started leaving more than money. One morning she found a loaf of fresh bread tucked next to the egg cartons, wrapped in a clean tea towel. Another time, a tiny handwritten note on a scrap of paper that said simply, "You helped my brother when he came home from the war. Thank you." And every Saturday after that, an envelope appeared beneath her basket of apples. Always the same. No name. No message. Just exactly $20 in crisp bills folded neatly inside. Sarah never tried to find out who left it. Some things, she decided, were better left a mystery. Gifts wrapped in grace, not needing explanation. As fall deepened and the first frost painted the ground silver, Sarah stood outside one night, her boots crunching over the frozen grass. She closed her eyes, breathing in the sharp, clean air. The cold bit her skin, but her chest felt warm. It wasn't just about the barn, or the check, or even the convoy. It was something deeper, something planted in her, something no winter could kill. Hope. That Christmas, she sent out her very first holiday cards. Simple ones, drawn by hand. Little sketches of her farm in the snow. One went to Amanda, thanking her again for the plane ticket that started it all. One went to the Veteran Support Fund, with no return address, and one went to Jim Carter. Inside his card, she wrote, "Dear Jim, the farm is still standing, so am I. The seeds you helped me plant, kindness, hope, stubbornness, they're growing strong here. You once told me that not all rescues happen on the battlefield. You were right. Sometimes they happen in a glance, in a seed offered without hesitation, in a barn rebuilt by strangers who became family. I hope wherever you are, you're still growing things too. Merry Christmas, Colonel." Always, Sarah. She slipped the card into an envelope and walked it to the mailbox at the end of her drive. The sky stretched endless above her, full of stars and cold wind. She smiled as she dropped the envelope in. She didn't expect a reply. She didn't need one. Some conversations didn't need words. Some stories echoed long after the last chapter. Spring would come again. The trees would bloom. The ground would soften, and life would begin again. And Sarah would keep planting, on her land, in her heart, and in the hearts of everyone who crossed her path. Because kindness once planted never really stops growing. It just waits, quiet and sure, for the right season to bloom. In our hardest moments, kindness still finds a way, often quietly, often in places the world forgets to look. Not everyone who helps wants their name spoken. Some just need to know that today, someone isn't alone. Someone got through the day a little easier. That's enough. And sometimes that small thing changes a life. You might forget the details. You might not remember every word. But if no one tells these stories again, the lessons fade. The beauty gets lost in time. That's why this story matters. Not because Sarah Miller gave up a seat, not because Jim Carter came back with a convoy, but because both of them reminded us of something we often forget, that doing the right thing, quietly, is still doing the right thing. That you don't have to be famous to make someone feel seen. That the smallest acts, offered freely, can ripple far beyond what we ever imagine. Sarah didn't give up her seat to be honored. Jim didn't bring help to be thanked. Neither expected anything in return, but life gave something back anyway. A broken-down farm came back to life. A soldier remembered what it felt like to be human. A community rediscovered warmth, and hope grew again in stubborn soil. It all started with a quiet decision. One woman, one man, one seat. If Sarah had shrugged and stayed in first class, no one would have blamed her. If Jim had taken the comfort and never returned, no one would have questioned it. But they didn't. They chose something better. You can. 2. Every day chances come in small disguises. Someone who needs a hand, a word, a gesture. We don't always know where those choices lead. But when we act from compassion, we plant seeds, and seeds grow. Sometimes slowly. Sometimes where we least expect them. But always eventually into something more. So if you ever wonder whether a kind act matters, remember Sarah. Remember Jim. Remember that a farm once saved by strangers now blooms brighter than ever. Because someone chose generosity over comfort, and that choice echoed. That choice still echoes. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where the quietest heroes are never forgotten, where we remember not just the big moments, but the small ones that truly change the world. Thank you for being here, and wherever you go next, keep growing things.